Good evening, Springfield. Welcome to the August 8th, 2022 Township of Springfield Planning Board meeting. Adequate notice has been given in accordance with the Sunshine Law. Notice was published December 16th in the Star Ledger, the official newspaper of the Township of Springfield for 2021 and 2022, and posted in the Annex Building on December 17, 2021. Can we do a salute to the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great. Rick, for now on, you're going to lead it for us. You were great. All right. Can we have a quick roll call?
Mayor Alex Kaiser.
Alex, you're on mute.
He's there.
Committeeman
Oh,
Huber.
here.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Barnett.
Here.
Mr. Schwartz.
Present and accounted for.
Mr. Loffer.
Here.
Mr. Brendel.
Mr. Brendel emailed that he's in Spain 6 hours ahead and he's having connectivity issues, so he's sorry he will miss it. Just a few minutes.
So he attended 6 hours ago.
Yeah.
Ms. Ruggiero is absent. Mr.
Yep.
Lopez is absent. Mr. Wishna.
Here.
Vice Chair Kessel.
Here.
And Chairman Tiger.
Here. Perfect. Okay, we had minutes on July 2022 meeting. Minutes. Everyone's had a chance to review them. I know Aaron said he read them from cover to cover. So any questions or concerns? Seeing none, can I have a motion to adopt the July 2022 minutes?
So moved.
All in favor? Alex?
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Anyone abstain? I think Aaron, you're going to abstain. Yep, Aaron's abstaining. Perfect. Okay, first application is Kevin McGovern Testamentary Trust, Co. Cornell Associates 5-2022S. This is 1 Cornell Parkway, Block 3903, Lot 16, preliminary and final site plan with variances with an elevator. Let's bring the applicant on, and the attorney Clara Heller-Akon. So we can start while she's being brought on from a high level. Mr. Disco, from my understanding, to give the board an update, this is an application for an elevator that's being built outside the building. That's taking, it's being built because of ADA compliance, so they can have an elevator so people that are visiting the building can go from one floor to another floor. And that because of that, there is a slight variance for lot coverage because of the need for an elevator for ADA compliance. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So the variance that they need is lot coverage. Did you guys have any concerns about this?
I have no concerns. And then there's also a technical variance for parking, which is non-conforming. And as you increase the lot area or floor area, I should say, technically you need a increased parking demand of 1 more space.
Okay, which we determined we don't need. Perfect.
It's sufficient the way it is for the uses that are there.
Perfect. Mr. Hughes, do you concur?
I do. 2 variances are required. The parking, there's no indication that additional parking is needed just to accommodate the space that's dedicated to an elevator. So Mike summed it up perfectly.
Perfect. So Counselor, if you want to very briefly, introduce your applicant and or actually your planner is probably all we need to just talk about the minor positive criteria on it, and then we'll be good.
Yes. Okay. Just very quickly, as was stated, the Kevin McGovern Testamentary Trust, which is doing business as Cornell Associates, is seeking preliminary and final site plan approval with variance relief. The 2 variances were noted, lot coverage being the 1 and the parking space being the 2nd. On the parking space, there is no change. The same number of spaces will be utilized. With regard to the lot coverage, it's the minimus. We're going from 71.78 to 72.25. I do have a planner. His name is Kenneth Gruskin from the Gruskin Group. He is a licensed architect and planner, which I would like to have testify regarding the support for the variance relief and if you could qualify him.
Yes, is he on video right now?
He should be.
I am.
Okay.
He's been before us. Glenn, do you want to take over?
Yeah, in just 1 second. I just have one question for Mr. Disco, I guess. Do they need preliminary and final site plan approval, or is this a minor site plan approval, or what does it really trigger, Michael, in your opinion? Do you have any idea?
Well, the definition of our minor site plan, it would meet that. It does indicate variances are required, so I'll rely on your judgment whether that moves it out of the minor, but it would, from a square footage, meet the minor site plan requirement or definition.
Okay, in my opinion, unless council objects, I think it's a minor site plan. It's not preliminary and final major. I think it's a minor with the variances being sought. Do you have a problem with that, Claire?
No, only to state that Ken prepared everything for the preliminary and final site plan. So we did put in a
I
full
don't care.
application.
It's okay.
That's so noted, but the fact is the board can move it down. You did overly good. That's all. So let me swear the witness in. Sir, would you please raise your right hand? Do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth in proceedings before the board
Yes.
tonight, so help you God? And what's your name?
Kenneth A. Gruskin, at 294 Morse Avenue.
Spell the last part, Ken.
G-R-U-S.
Ken, spell your last name.
G-R.
And-
U-S as in Sam, K-I-N.
Okay, and Ken, you've been qualified before this board before and your licenses are still valid as of tonight. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you're testifying
Counsel-
both as an architect and a planner. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I have no problems. He's been before us before. So, Mr. Gruskin, if you can very quickly put on the record, the criteria for the lot coverage variance and the parking variance. I think you've already heard from our engineer and planner that they were comfortable, but go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So to keep this brief, we are looking for the C2 variance, of which the two criteria we have to demonstrate is that we have to show that the purposes of the multiple land use law would be advanced by the deviation from the zoning ordinance requirement, and that the variance can be granted without substantial detriment to the public good and without substantial impairment of the intent and purpose of the zone plan and zoning ordinance. So specifically, what we want to just mention is that this elevator is being put on the building is purely voluntary, and that its sole job is to provide handicapped accessibility to the second floor, and as mentioned, does not create any additional rentable space. It went outside the building, I just want to mention, because there was no place to put it inside without being extremely destructive to the entire building. But that said, with respect to the C2 variance, I believe that the purposes of the municipal land use ordinance, specifically sections A and D in the Springfield ordinance, would be advanced by the deviation from the zoning ordinance by enhancing the health, safety, and general welfare of the public. And I'm not going to read sections A and D because I want to be brief, but they address that concern specifically. The variance relief can be granted without substantial detriment to the public good and will actually benefit the public by making the second floor of the building accessible to disabled individuals. And that benefit would substantially outweigh any detriment to the public good. Additionally, granting this variance will not substantially impair the intent or purpose of the zone plan and zone ordinance because the proposed 114 square foot footprint, as the engineers and planners mentioned, is de minimis, resulting in an increased lot coverage of less than 0.5%, which will not negatively impact stormwater runoff, the building, or the existing commercial building neighborhood. And of course, lastly, providing an elevator would advance the mandate of the American with Disabilities Act to remove architectural barriers in existing buildings and facilities. And this would not only serve the Springfield community, its residents, but also the surrounding communities as well, who may visit and work in this building. So,
Mr. Gruskin,
yes.
clearly said, what parking variance, if you could just address that real quick, and then we can open up to the board.
Sure. The parking variance is, as was mentioned, is purely technical by the addition of square footage, which is not allocated to anything truly adding to the rentability of this building. So therefore, we don't believe it creates any additional parking load to this parking lot.
Perfect. Mr. Hughes, do you concur with that testimony?
I do. I think Mr. Gruskin has sufficiently addressed the criteria for the two C2 variances they're requesting.
Perfect. Mr. Disco, anything further?
The only thing further I have nothing to disagree with Mr. Gruskin on is that the site currently only has one accessible parking space, and by code it requires two. The board
Okay.
could impose that correction at this time if they so chose.
I think
I
that we
would
should,
indicate that my client will comply with that requirement and work with Mike Disco on that.
I think that's sufficient. Ms. Clara, anything further, or can I open up to the board for any questions?
Fine.
Perfect. Mayor Kaiser,
I have no questions on this for this app.
Mr. Huber, Committeeman Huber,
Nothing.
Mr. Schwartz,
Nothing from me, thank you.
Mr. Barnett,
Very straightforward, no issues.
Aaron Loeffler,
No questions.
Mr. Wishna,
No questions.
Vice Chair Kessel.
No questions.
And I have no questions as well. So at this time, I'd like to take this opportunity to open this application up to the public. Anyone wish to speak on this application, please come forward. Apu, if you can just look and see if there's any folks there.
No hands raised.
Perfect. Seeing none of the public, I'm going to remand it back to the board. I think that, so they're requiring, it's a minor site plan for a lot coverage and parking variance. And then one of the conditions of approval will be for them to convert one of their existing parking spots into a handicap parking spot. And they're working on a plan to get that happen, to make that happen. Questions? Anyone want to make that motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion for the preliminary and final site plan, or minor, with the variances that you mentioned for an elevator, for application 5-22S, Kevin McGovern, Testamentary Trust Co., Cornell Associates.
Second.
Mr. Huber, second. We have a roll call?
Mr. Barnett,
Yes.
Chairman Huber,
Yes.
Mayor Kaiser,
Yes.
Mr. Schwartz,
Yes to approve.
Mr. Lawfer,
Yes.
Mr. Wishna,
Yes.
Vice Chair Kessel,
Yes.
and Chairman Tiger.
Yes, perfect. All right, thank you,
To the
Council.
board.
Do you want to waive reading in case you want to move to put this elevator?
Yes, I do.
Board have any concerns with that?
Nope.
One question, Mr. Chairman. Clara, what did the county say about this? They not interested at all?
We don't do that until after we come before you.
not
I don't think they have any jurisdiction, but that'll have to be complied with. Just get a letter of no jurisdiction. They don't have any
Okay.
anyway, so, okay.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you again.
And, okay, the next application, Story Dispensary of Springfield LLC, 4-2022S, 130 Route 22, block 3106, Lot 1, for preliminary and final site plan, conditional use and cannabis dispensary. While this is loading up, while you're bringing them on, if we can quickly, Mr. Disco, I understand, for the board, last time, for us as an informal review. There was no testimony. We just reviewed some questions and concerns. The board had some opportunity to comment and include anything in their resubmission. I understand they've given a resubmission, and I understand you've resolved a lot of the concerns. Would you like to give the board a little bit of an update on that before we open it up to the applicant?
Sure. The applicant, based upon the last hearing, the feedback that he got from the board, they revised the plans. They added landscaping on the west side, which is the U-turn side of the facade. They added an additional handicapped parking space to comply. So moving from 2 to 3, they did that there's 2 little stone islands, and they removed those and restriped for the van accessible wider width and added a third accessible space. They also agreed and put notes on the plan for replacement of signs. I clarified what that meant with the applicant's attorney this afternoon. And also they will restripe pavement markings out there, arrows specifically, by the ingress egress. There's no site changes to the site. Their traffic engineer can certainly testify to the fact that DOT is not going to look at this because there's no significant change in traffic. And we requested that they replace the stop signs and the no right turn on red signs. They also clarified that the parking will be sufficient through the Klein Associates report. And I would concur with that based upon my parking counts, that observations that I did over, a week or two period in July.
Perfect. So you're comfortable with their traffic expert?
Yeah, and they also submitted a sign package. Previously, there was just placeholder signs on the 2 pylon signs. They filled those in from the prior tenant, and then they showed 2 facade signs which are compliant to our ordinance. I think Keenan also commented on those as well.
Yep, we're going to go over to Keenan real quick. Keenan?
Yeah, so we had issued a letter prior to the last hearing, and it looks like the applicant's taken the opportunity to address a number of our comments. So we did issue another letter on August 4th. I would just remind the board, in addition to what you just heard from Mr. Disco, this is a conditional use permitted within the HC zone. So there are certain conditional use standards that the board has to determine are being complied with on the applicant side. And so we just asked for a little testimony specific to a few of those items that would include odor control, any generators or mechanical equipment that would be installed on the site just to address any noise concerns. And then we just asked for a little testimony relative to storage and removal of solid waste, as well as just the frequency of deliveries. But as Mr. Disco said, the signage that they've submitted, in our view, complies with the ordinance, and the parking situation is essentially an existing condition, and they've demonstrated through a shared parking analysis that it looks like there's sufficient parking on site to support this use.
Perfect. So, Counselor, we'll go to you to kind of real quickly give the board an overview. I know that we had a great pre-review with you at the last meeting. I know, I think we discussed you're going to have the owner applicant to testify a little bit, brief, and then you're going to have the traffic expert. I think a lot of the traffic stuff was resolved with Mr. Disco, so they can kind of provide that overview. I think what I like, if you can have your applicant address some of the comments that Mr. Disco and Mr. Hughes put on the record.
Certainly. So good evening, everyone. Brief introduction. My name is Cameron McLeod of the Gibbons Law Firm. Here on behalf of the applicant, Story Dispensary Springfield. We're here for preliminary and final major site plan approval of this conditional use, as Keenan noted. We have no variances on this application tonight. As the chairman noted, I've got 2 affirmative witnesses that we'll offer this evening. Mr. Aaron Epstein, who is with us. He's a representative of the owner and the applicant, as well as, Lee Klein, who is our professional traffic engineer, Lee Wave. And he's able to give you a little more background should you have any questions for further clarification beyond what Mr. Disco has already provided to the board. I will note that we did notice directly for this application and for this hearing, an affidavit regarding that was provided to the board secretary ahead of this hearing. And I know we had worked with Mr. Keynes as well to get some feedback on that prior to getting it out. So Glenn, with your kind permission, I'll call Aaron as a witness and let you take the reins.
Okay with me, if it's okay with Chairman Tiger. And
So
just put your first, go ahead, Jeff.
No, let's go ahead. Well, can we swear both of them in, Glenn? Because in case there's a issue.
Absolutely.
Aaron, where are you at? Oh, they are.
Are they both up?
They are.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, gentlemen, raise your right hands. Do you both swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth in proceedings before the board tonight, so help you God?
Yes.
I do.
Okay, the representative, please state your name and spell your last name for the board.
My name is Aaron Epstein. It's Epstein.
What's your position with the applicant, Aaron?
So I'm a partner at EMNJ Management, and we've been engaged to oversee all of the management and operations of the dispensary.
Okay, Mr. Klein, have you testified before this board before?
If I have, it was a very long time ago.
Okay. So, Mr. Klein, how do you spell your last name?
Klein.
And you're a licensed professional engineer in the state of New Jersey, is that correct?
My license is current and in good standing, yes.
And you also have a particular expertise in traffic and parking and circulation, do you not?
I also have a nationally certified professional traffic operations engineer, and that certification is also current.
Mr.
Is any of the
Chairman?
board- I don't take issue with any of the board. If I don't see anyone raise their hand of any issue, I'm going to accept his qualifications. I don't see anyone, so accept his
Thank you.
qualifications. Both sworn in. Aaron, if you can give us an overview, and Counselor can kind of direct you with some of the questions to answer our professionals.
Yeah, so Aaron, if you could give the board just a kind of quick, couple of minute day in the life, essentially, what the business operations will look like at the proposed dispensary, and then we'll walk through a couple of the comments that I know had come up both in Mr. Hughes' letter and in Mr. Disco's, just to iron out a few more of those conditional use items that hadn't already been determined by the Township Council's resolution.
Sure, absolutely. First, just to give a little background, I'm a practicing attorney in the state of don't practice much anymore. I'm an attorney in the state of New Jersey, and I've been in the cannabis industry for about 7 years. I've served as COO and executive in marijuana companies across 5 states, including I spent about 5.5 years with Garden State Dispensary in New Jersey, where I oversaw operations of their grow facility, manufacturing, and 3 dispensaries in Woodbridge, Eatontown, and Union. Now, to this operation, you guys have seen the plans for the proposed operation in 130 Route 22 Springfield. Essentially, it's a fairly standard dispensary. One of the unique aspects of it is we have 2 entrances and exits. We've strategically placed our security desk so that they will have view of patrons coming in and leaving from both entrances and exits. All of the perimeter and the interior of the facility will be monitored 24/7 by video surveillance to facilitate this. Consumers will come into the facility. They will park. They will enter the facility if they've into the lobby area. If there's a register open, they can proceed to that register and purchase. We expect a lot of the consumers to pre-order their products, so we anticipate fairly short transaction times. And then once we've arranged their order, they will, receive it, pay, and leave.
Please confirm, Mr. Epstein, that there will be no curbside pickup.
There's no curbside pickup.
And that if you ever understand if it's something that you would like to do, you would wind up back before this board to evaluate that.
Yes.
Okay, continue.
So, with the with regards to security, in addition to video surveillance, we will also have an alarm system that is connected to every door in the facility. And will be activated by any improper usage of those doors, especially after hours when we're closed. We will also have motion detection throughout the facility and installed on all of our cameras. And there will be both audible alarms and silent panic alarms throughout the building. There'll also be glass breaks on all the windows. Those windows that we have in the facility, which there are a number of them, will all be tinted. Essentially, it's a 3M film that we usually use that clouds it, so that will be opaque. That's a requirement of the state that nobody is allowed to see inside the facility. So we present, I think that was presented on one of the packages you guys received. And from a physical personnel standpoint, we typically, in all of my previous facilities, we like to hire retired local law enforcement. If you've ever been to Garden State Dispensary, you see a lot of them. We think that the ties to the community, and it's just a perfect fit for de-escalation practices and their training for this industry. So, at our facility during all operating hours, you'll have 2 armed security personnel on site. And that's really to facilitate not only any issues that might arise inside the building, but also outside the building. Whether it's just doing a normal sweep of the parking lot to make sure there's no loitering, or if, God forbid, there's ever, which we don't anticipate, an issue where you might have to, manage parking or people coming in and out. We always have that extra security guard on staff to help facilitate those issues.
Aaron, let me direct you to kind of 2 points here. One, I know Mr. Disco asks just for a little background on the delivery and loading procedures, just that those are well laid out for the board.
Yeah, so the delivery in this industry is very structured. Everything has to be pre-planned. It's not a lot of deliveries. These are fairly small items. So, I would anticipate a facility like this would get 5 to 7 deliveries of cannabis products per week. Each of the Class 5 retail licenses have the ability to transport product, and there will also be Class 6 delivery companies. And what that entails is essentially a car or a van, typically like a Sprinter size van, that's unmarked. They will schedule a pickup from a grower processor. So let's say we need to get some more flour or other products. We'll schedule a pickup. They will coordinate with our security staff on when, what date and what time that will take place. All that information is transmitted to the CRC. We'll have real-time contact with their drivers, including access to GPS monitoring to know exactly when they're going to arrive. We'll have a spot that's essentially coned off at the time of delivery near our separate delivery door, which you can see on the plans. It's a door that is adjacent but separate to the main entry. That way, all of the products can be brought in securely once they're delivered. When the delivery van arrives, security meets them outside, escorts them unloading the product into our facility, where they're brought into a separate receiving area. All those products are then inspected against the manifest that has been generated and sent to us. As soon as all the products are inspected and cleared, they're brought directly into our DEA cage, also known as a vault. And then the delivery vehicle leaves.
Nice. So a couple of other just clarifications that came out of the review letters. One, I know we talked about the odor control mechanisms and where those are being integrated. So if you can just highlight for the board that.
Yeah, so, odor is really not a big issue with these facilities. One, we're not proposing, nor do we ever intend to utilize this space as a lounge. So there will be no consumption on site. Just based on CRC regulation, there's no consumption of cannabis, tobacco, or alcohol permitted on site. So that includes anything within the facility or within the parking lot. Our security will be regularly monitoring both physically on the in person and on cameras to make sure that there's no consumption at all being taken place. Now, with regards to the product itself, CRC regulations mandate that all the product has to be packaged in airtight containers. So when we receive those deliveries, part of the inspection is not only to check that the order matches the manifest, but that all the packaging has not been compromised. And that includes tamper evident seals on all the packaging. So, there with no consumption and with airtight containers, and at no point does anybody open the container before it transfers from the dispensary to the consumer, there really is not a lot of chance for odor to escape. Now, in addition to that, we install HVAC units that have carbon air scrubbers in them. So those typically go right inside the unit. If there's ever a need for additional measures to mitigate any potential odors, we've put freestanding carbon air scrubbers. That typically is in a cultivation or manufacturing facility, though I've never seen it used in a dispensary, but that's always an option to add on to the carbon air scrubbers in the HVAC units.
Okay. And, Aaron, your comment about packaging obviously begs the question about refuse as well. You've seen the site, you've been to the site. Do you have any concerns about the sufficiency of the existing refuse area for the limited refuse that I understand this project would produce?
Yeah, so the dispensaries generate very little waste. Being next to a restaurant, they will have exponentially more waste than us. If you think of us as almost like a pharmacy or an office building, your general waste is going to be office supplies, packaging. If you order something from Amazon boxes. With regards to disposal of the product itself, it's very minimal in a dispensary. We don't take returns of flour except for in very extreme circumstances. So if that does happen, which is fairly rare, the process would be to take the product, mix it with, and you're talking about a fairly small amount, mix it with 50% paper waste or cardboard, put in something like a food processor that would fit on your kitchen counter, no bigger than a coffee maker. We might spray it once with bleach to make sure it's completely unusable. And then it just gets disposed of in your normal waste. Typically in our dispensaries, we will also put in locking disposal dumpsters. So if they're usually like 2 to 4 yards, they have a bar that goes across the top that the waste management company has a lock to, and then they just dispose of it the normal way. But the only time that you'll have a significant amount of cannabis disposal would be in the event of a recall. And in that situation, we would primarily be a hub for for consumers to bring their product back to us. And we would work with the CRC on how to dispose of that. But typically that would go back either to the CRC for testing or to the grower processor where it originated from. So I can't really see a circumstance where we would have any kind of mass disposal of cannabis product at a dispensary. I haven't seen it before. So by all means, it would be fairly minimal waste generated by this project.
Great. And I think the last comment that's in, and this is Mr. Hughes's letter, number 6, are there any generators or additional mechanical equipment intended?
No, not at this time.
Okay, great. Mr. Chairman, I have nothing further for this witness.
Yeah, the only thing I want to talk about signs. We saw a sign
Yes.
submitted. I'm going to open up to the board when there's questions about, in speaking with our professionals, if it's something we want to do Story dispensary and drop Springfield LLC, but I want to see what the board has to kind of say about that as a potential. Would that be something you would be comfortable with?
So I think it's actually an Aaron, correct me if I'm off. It's actually driven by state regulation on this point.
Yes, but I believe our attorney, we reviewed it, we'll check with it. If the state allows that to happen, that we would be able to.
I would love to drop it if Jeff Brown will let me.
So if the board, what we'll do is if the board is comfortable with that, our board attorney will give that as an option as one of 2, and our board attorney will review that with his expert in his practice and be able to determine if that's acceptable. I believe from discussing with her, it was an option up on the board to the LLC is negligible, but we'll see what they come back and say. But let's see what the board has to say. So if nothing further, I'd like to go back to Mr. Disco. Anything, questions for the witness before we open up to the board?
No, maybe just a blanket statement that all of the conditions, if Mr. McLeod or Mr. Epstein has that, they're itemized in comment 1 in mine, and I think Keenan itemized as well. Maybe just a blanket that they conform to all of the conditional use standards, one of which was the generator mechanical equipment, and one was the odor as well. But there are some other, probably some that don't apply to this business, but if you're comfortable making a statement for the record, I think that would help.
Yeah, and I think actually, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Disco, Exhibit H, as I recall, to the application actually has a certification to that effect. So we're perfectly fine making that representation.
Great.
Okay, and could you just list the hours of operation?
Sure. I think at this point, we'll actually adjust those kind of as we figure out how the operation is going to work. Right now, it'll be obviously compliant with the township code, which I think is 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. And I think in your letter, Mike, you'd mentioned that some of the adjacent businesses close between 9 and 10 p.m. I think that's one that we'll kind of play by ear to see, what the adjacent landscape actually looks like when we get things up and operating.
So you'll conform with whatever our town ordinance is?
Yep.
Okay, that's fine. Keenan, and I believe you have Spatch on. Do you guys have anything to add?
No, I think they addressed all of the outstanding conditional use standards that we'd requested in the letter. And again, there's no variances to this application, so I think they've addressed everything.
Perfect. So let's go through the board to see if there's any questions. And for the members of the public, we will open it up at the end for questions of both witnesses as opposed to doing them one by one. So go ahead. Let's open it up. Mayor?
I've spent significant time with the applicant in my role as chairman of the subcommittee. So I do not have any questions for this witness at this time. But we'll make a quick remark when we vote.
Mayor, what is your thoughts on the sign? Are we willing to up the sign?
Hey, I would be willing to, if they can do it, Story Dispensary would work for me.
Okay.
But that will be up to them, and it would certainly be a cleaner look.
Yeah, and that's what our professionals have said, but we will allow our counselor to work with he has someone in his firm that's done a lot of research on it. And if the board is good with it, then it'll be either or, depending on what the research comes back at. Committeeman Rich Huber?
Nothing. Everything.
Mr. Schwartz?
Nothing for this witness.
Mr. Barnett?
No, I don't see any issues with this conforming to our ordinance. The applicant didn't present it, but did give in our packet the conceptual renderings, which I think look great. And I have no issues.
Perfect. Mr. Loeffler?
Okay, I do have a question. I just don't know if it should be directed to Mr. Epstein or to Mr. Klein, but it's a traffic question. Should I ask it now or?
No, wait till the next witness.
Okay, then now I have no questions now.
Mr. Wishna?
No questions. I'd just like to thank the applicant because this was definitely informative to understand what the day-to-day operations are like. I did not have that background before, so appreciate that insight and look forward to hearing from the next witness.
Mrs. Kessel?
No questions.
And then my only question was, I would like that some meeting take place with someone from the police department to make sure the security plan that you guys have come up with, they're good with. This is new to.
They have met at length with the subcommittee.
Oh, perfect. And that takes care of that. Okay, so Mr. Epstein, stand by because we're going to go to the next witness. The public at the end will have the right to question you, but we'll do it all at once.
Great,
so
thank you.
Before we go to the traffic expert, Mr. Disco, I understand just to reiterate for the record, you've done your own traffic calculations, and if you could just quickly share with the board so it can tie into their traffic experts.
Yeah, I would categorize them as more parking observations. Basically, I went to the site multiple times, different days, and the most or the highest inventory of parked vehicles on the site was 11. And I prepared a table, albeit it was today, but it was the first chance from after vacation that I had a chance to get the data that I had. So 11 was the most cars I've seen at the site, and out of 56 parking spaces. So there's 45 typically available or more parking spaces for any use that would come in there. To me, that seems ample. I read Mr. Klein's report for traffic and parking, and I see nothing in it that I would disagree with at this time. So I think it would be wise to present his testimony.
Yeah, so
Can I ask a question of Mr. Disco, please?
Yeah, absolutely.
The dispensary you went to see, was that a general dispensary or a medical dispensary?
The parking observations were for this site. So what was available at this site, given that there was the one vacant tenant space. The one that I had put in my first report when I went to the Union Dispensary Garden, that was, as I understood it, opened as a medical dispensary, and there's still signs that said patient parking there. I presume that morphed into more of a retail establishment, but that was the only one locally that I knew of prior to finding out about a Maplewood one. So,
all right, and you don't know the difference in parking requirements, medical versus general.
I do not for cannabis. No.
Okay, hopefully the traffic expert or Mr. Epstein will be able to double back on that. Thanks.
Mr. Klein, if you could, I know you've already been sworn in, which is great. If you can give the board an overview and to kind of tie into some of the questions that you just heard from Mr. Schwartz.
Certainly. Good evening. Again, my name is Lee, middle initial D as in Daniel Klein. I prepared a traffic and parking evaluation report dated July 28th, 2022. I visited the site on Friday, July 22nd between 5 and 6 p.m. While I was there, I counted the number of striped parking spaces. 56 was the number I found. I also observed during that hour from 5 to 6 the maximum number of cars parked on site. That number was 11. As you heard from Mr. Disco and in his report, the maximum that he saw on the different times that he went to the site was also 11. I also did a shared parking calculation. Now, this is a shopping center. It's got 3 different stores, so it's considered a shopping center. Various uses go in a shopping center. So what I looked at was the different uses that are there now. Japanese restaurant, a restaurant, auto parts sales store, as well as the proposed dispensary. The Institute of Transportation Engineers has temporal distributions for parking demand. It tells us by hour when it's 100% occupied, when it's only 50%, and various percentages throughout the day. So I looked at the different hours of the day for the 3 different uses and found the worst hour. And I put together a shared parking calculation in my report. And bottom line is we found that the maximum peak parking demand would be 52 cars. For instance, auto parts generally peaks at 10 in the morning on a weekday, and the dispensary is going to peak at 2 p.m. and the restaurant peaks at noon and 6 p.m. So you can see from the times and the different uses that they complement each other and that there's not going to be struggling to find parking within this site. So again, we found the combination would be 52 parked cars. There are 56 parking spaces. So we've got a roughly a less than 10%, but about 10% leeway between the demand and the actual supply. I also looked at trip generation, even though, again, like I said, this is still a 12,000 square foot shopping center. If you change out the T-Mobile tenant for the dispensary or any other retail, it would just be a change of tenant within the building. However, I looked at the trip generation numbers for the dispensary. 2,400 square feet is the round number I used, and compared that to 2,400 square feet of shopping center. And the increase between a T-Mobile store and a dispensary, they're looking at less than 40 trips per hour. And I believe Mr. Disco and his observations at Garden State also found the trip generation in the PM peak hour to be about 40 trips. So I think we're right in line with that. So my conclusions are that the parking will be adequate at 56 parking spaces for the demand of 52, and that the trip generation, actually just the change of tenancy of the building, will not require any other outside agency approvals. So if you have any questions, we're ready to take them.
Lee, very quickly to answer Mr. Schwartz's question. Are you aware that the Garden State Dispensary site in Union is both an adult use and a medical facility? So the counts there, if they're indicative of what you've suggested, are probably a decent indicia of what this site may expect, or would it be your testimony that that's
no? Well, I think what I would conclude is that based on the numbers that Mr. Disco counted when he was there, and that the fact that from what I'm hearing, it's a medical and recreational facility, This is only going to be a recreational dispensary, that this could potentially generate a little bit less traffic and less parking demand.
Thanks. So it's your testimony that the use can handle, the parking can handle the use.
That's correct.
Perfect. Okay, so Mr. Disco, you concur with what you've done compared to
Well,
what is
again, there's going to be, it seems that Mr. Klein's one observation, which was on Friday between 5 and 6. I looked at my between 5 and 6s at this site, and they're 11, 11, and 9 in addition to his 11. So I think it seems you can zero in on the 11 as being just about the max that currently is being parked at the site. Again, Tuca, to me, is mostly a takeout type of operation, even though they do have seating in there. And Advance, I don't know what the peak time of their operation is. Mr. Klein proffered that it would be 10 a.m., I suppose, on a weekend. I have no idea. When I went to do these observations, I peeked in at these stores, and Tuca, I never saw anybody sitting in there when I went to these observations, mostly a takeout. And Advance Auto, I dare say if I saw more than 2 groups of customers there, I'd be lying. So to me, the 45 available parking spaces, to me, dictates that regardless of the use that we're talking about, any tenant that's coming in there is able to not overpark the site. Again, I was really focused on the parking at this site, not trip generation. Although I did, again, go to the Union store first for my first review, just to get a sense of the in and out at that site as a guide.
You said
So
you
I'm
didn't-
certainly comfortable from a parking standpoint, yeah.
Perfect. And you didn't do any sampling in the Union store, right?
None of the stores did I
Okay.
see.
Spatch, I pronounced your name wrong. I apologize. If you can just state it for the record so I know what it is again.
Spatch Tran.
Spatch Tran. Can you
Silent
just
H.
give the board any questions or concerns with traffic? I know that's not your background, but was there anything that you and Keenan had any questions?
I completely agree with Mr. Disco. The parking supply is an existing non-conforming condition, but it sounds like, based on what we've heard from the testimony and also Mr. Disco's observations, that the parking supply is sufficient for any retailer that would occupy this space. And the space is not expanding, so there's no new demand for parking. It's just an existing non-conforming condition.
Perfect. Okay, Mayor Kaiser?
No, I don't think I have any questions for this applicant. His report was well documented.
Perfect. Mr. Huber?
I'm still just concerned about the traffic because, summertime, it's lighter there. I don't know. I'm just a little hesitant about the traffic because a lot of people are on vacation. A lot of people are away. I mean, I'd much rather have a traffic report like in September, October, and see if it builds up at all. That's only my opinion.
Let me stop for 1 second, Mr. Huber. Mr. Disco, if we doubled the most that was there at that given point in time, do you feel like they would be able to operate safely and efficiently?
If you went to 22, you would still have 34 available parking spaces. So 22 between the existing 2 users and 34 available for the 3rd user.
Okay.
Again, I don't think you're going to have 34 distinct vehicles present at one time at any retail. So from a parking perspective, I don't see why the site won't function as it has since it's been constructed that way.
All right, I was only my
Yeah,
opinion.
I mean, there's always traffic, but from a parking standpoint, the 56 spaces is ample for Tuca, Advance Auto, and this use.
Okay.
No question about that.
I trust Mike.
Yeah, that's why I went to him. I won't even ask Mr. Klein if he agrees. So we'll skip that. Mr. Schwartz?
Mr. Klein, if I understand correctly, you went to the site one time. Is that right?
Correct.
And how much time did you spend there?
1 hour.
And that was when? What day of the week?
It was a Friday around dinner time between 5 and 6 p.m.
Okay. And is there any reason to believe that Friday between 5 and 6 p.m. is the peak time for a general marijuana dispensary?
Possibly after work on the way home, similar to like a liquor store. If you're going to stop off and pick up a 6-pack of beer on your way home from work.
Mr. Klein, Mr. Klein, can we stick to the facts? You say possibly. So the answer is you don't know, correct?
Repeat the question.
Do you know whether or not 5 to 6 p.m. on a Friday is the peak time for traffic at a general marijuana dispensary?
I'll have to defer to Mr. Epstein.
So the answer is no.
Correct.
Can you please just answer the question? It's no.
No.
Okay. And is a professional traffic engineer is visiting a site for one day for 1 hour deemed sufficient to render an opinion?
I was looking for just confirmation of the parking demand at the current shopping center. I used the Institute of Transportation Engineers data to corroborate that data, and my conclusions would still be the same.
And I'm looking at your data, and I don't see any date associated with when this data is from the Institute of Transportation Engineers. Is that current data, 2022?
It's the 5th edition. I believe it came out a few years ago. It's a compilation of data from years before that.
What does a few years ago mean? Are we talking 3, 5, 10?
I think it came out in 2018. I'm not sure exactly.
So we're talking at least 4 years ago. And then, of course, the data was previous to that. So focusing specifically on marijuana dispensaries, if the data is from 2018, that's more likely for a medical use, not a general use.
Correct. It's data from all over the country. It's not just data from New Jersey.
I understand that. But in 2018, I'm not aware of there being any states that had legalized general marijuana use. Are you?
No.
Okay. So then we're talking about a medical marijuana dispensary data from 4 years ago.
Correct.
How does traffic for a medical marijuana facility compare to a general marijuana facility?
I have not studied the difference between the two.
Okay, so then your reliance on medical marijuana dispensary, is that within the confines of being able to render a reasonable opinion as a traffic engineer?
I believe so.
And how do you get there if you don't know a comparison between general and medical marijuana dispensary? How can you possibly render an opinion as to what a general would be relying on medical information?
When a new use comes out, we need to rely on the data that's been collected from the closest uses. So if I didn't have the ITE data, I would have to rely on other sources of that data. But again, based on square footage and based on the number of people in the facility at the same time, I believe my numbers are correct.
But you have not made observations at any other general medical, any general marijuana dispensaries in New Jersey or elsewhere.
Correct.
This is your first time rendering a traffic opinion as to a marijuana dispensary.
No,
it's not. Okay. Well, how many opinions have you given?
We had an application in Hoboken that I worked on and presented testimony. That was a retail facility with no parking because it was in Hoboken. One in Jersey City that had a parking lot associated with it. And then I'm working on another one that I haven't finished the report yet, one in East Orange. And then this one.
Is this the first time you've testified before a planning or zoning board on this issue?
No, Hoboken and Jersey City.
All right, but Hoboken, let's leave Hoboken aside because it had no parking, so that's foot traffic, and I don't think we're worried about that on Route 22. The Jersey City facility, did you rely on the same Institute of Transportation Engineers data that you did here?
In that case, City of Jersey City had a parking requirement, and we met that parking requirement. And the Institute of Transportation Engineers, I think, corroborated that data.
Okay. Have you made observations at any general marijuana dispensary at any time as to the traffic flow in and out?
No.
Okay. During the 1 hour that you spent at the location for this proposed facility, did you make any observations regarding the traffic on Route 22?
Traffic on Route 22 was steady. I mean, there's breaks in traffic sometimes. I remember coming in and coming out. There's, traffic signals not too far away, not too close by, but traffic flow is pretty steady.
Okay. Do you know what the traffic flow on Route 22 is, say, noon on a Saturday?
No, I have to look that up from maybe DOT source or so.
Right. And while you rely on the data from the books, you don't know what the ins and outs on a weekend are in that parking lot in actuality.
Correct.
And you don't know what the traffic flow on Route 22 is in actuality.
Correct.
And this location happens to be located on, if I remember correctly, on a turn from west to east side of Route 22, where traffic can make a U-turn.
U-turn, that's correct.
And you made no observations as to whether or not there was any impeding of traffic flow based on flow from that U-turn
There was no impeding flow of traffic from that U-turn.
during that 1 hour that you were there.
That's correct.
Mr. Tiger, I'm not going to prolong this, but I'm just sorry. I can't accept this opinion. It's, to me, it's based on data that's not relevant, and it's, 1 hour on one day that you can't describe as typical. I don't buy it. I'm always concerned with increasing traffic flow on Route 22, particularly right at the U-turns. And I just don't think that enough has been done here to satisfy me that there's not going to be a problem.
So, Mr. Schwartz, so let me give you some background on some of the concerns that I had that I talked to Mr. Disco about. One, in this case, I had him do many different studies himself to be able to come representing our board. I toyed with back and forth whether I was going to hire our own traffic professional, but I felt that Mr. Disco, on behalf of the board, can help make us that determination. I do concur with you that this property is unique, especially because it has the jug handle very closely. So I do agree with you, but that's where we've deferred to Mr. Disco to kind of help with that. So I'll open it up back to him to kind of to give us, the board, some guidance. But given the fact that whether it's, personally, I believe, potentially cannabis and use versus T-Mobile should potentially be different demands. However, the way that the demand is, it's retail to retail, and it's a change of tendency. It was the way that Glenn has advised us and to review this application. But let me give Mr. Disco.
Mr. Tiger, in fairness, the applicant's traffic engineer has not given us any indication as to the actual traffic flow caused by T-Mobile either. What we're told is that there's going to be 40 more trips. And Mr. Klein, was that 40 more trips per day, per hour?
Per peak hour.
Per peak hour.
The T-Mobile store was closed at the time.
Right. So, okay. Do you know what the flow of traffic was and when T-Mobile was open?
Actually, Mr. Disco, did you go to Verizon in our discussions and give, because I know that there was no other T-Mobile nearby, but just to give us an overview?
I went to the Verizon store in Union.
Yeah.
And did some traffic counts on some of the same time or within 5 minutes of when I did the other counts. So there were times where I counted 13 to 15 Verizon vehicles at that site. I did not sit and observe the traffic at Verizon, nor did I sit and observe the traffic from this site. When there's only 11 parked cars, you don't have a big trip generation of traffic. So the 13 to 15 vehicles at the Union, Verizon, and the Center Island is what I saw when I was doing the parking observations. Basically, it was drive-through parking lot, observe the number of cars. I've gone to that store myself, so I'm familiar with that store. I'm also familiar with the Mountainside Echo Plaza Verizon, which has less traffic or less parking and less traffic than the Union store. So I thought the Union store was a better fit.
Let's see what the rest of the board has to say, and then Andrew. So Aaron.
Okay, actually, Mr. Schwartz took away some of my thunder, but I have a quick question as well. A little bit of history. I've always been concerned with traffic, especially when new businesses open up in that center aisle, which is traffic nightmare under the best of circumstances. However, in the past, there was where the restaurant is, there used to be a Dunkin' Donuts. And I used to frequent that Dunkin' Donuts quite often, as you can tell by looking at me. Aside from that, I remember many times not being able to find a parking spot in that lot. I also remember waiting in line with the line spilling out into Route 22. And I'm just concerned that may happen again. Is there how comfortable are you, Mr. Klein, in not having that situation happen again, because it happened in the past?
I'm not quite following, but I mean, let
me make it a little clearer. There used to be a Dunkin' Donuts there. Traffic, the parking was always an issue, or often an issue, and cars waiting to get into the parking lot was often an issue.
Okay.
And that with cars sometimes spilling out into the shoulder of Route 22. It's a center aisle, and there's a lot of cars going by there. How comfortable are you, or how sure are you that situation won't happen again?
I'm going to have to defer some of that to my client, to the applicant, because he knows more about the number of transactions per hour and things like that. But I believe that the reason probably why the Dunkin' Donuts left was not only probably because they needed more parking, but they were probably looking for a drive-through location as well. So, yeah, in that situation, apples to grapefruits, that it's not, I can't compare the two. But you're asking me how sure I am that the anywhere from 44 to 34 parking spaces that could be available during the day for the dispensary, will that be adequate to serve the customers? Again, I want to defer to Mr. Epstein to see if he can give me a feel for, does he think there'll be more than 34 to 44 people in the store at any one time, assuming everybody comes in one car?
Mr. Epstein, if you can come back real quick and just answer that question short.
And Aaron, to that point, let me just kind of supplement there too. If you can hit on the occupancy loads for the building, I think that may actually resolve a lot of these concerns.
Hey, so yeah, this comes up a lot, this issue, and I want to state, first, I think a lot of these numbers are significantly overstated, and let me explain why. Based on Mr. Disco's observation at Garden State Dispensary, first, that facility started selling adult use cannabis on June 15th. So when he was there, that facility was selling adult use and medical. Now, think when they were approved, there were 18 adult use dispensaries in the entire state of New Jersey. I don't think all 18 were actually open. I think it might have been only 16 that were open. By the time we open up, there will be likely well over 100 dispensaries in the state of New Jersey. So even at the numbers that he observed, I think that still puts us in a safe place with regards to traffic and parking, where we would have minimal impact. When you look at the fact that there's going to be 10 times the number of retail facilities in the state that we open, you're going to see a significant amount of dilution amongst each dispensary, especially because Union just approved 2 more dispensaries on Route 22. And then you have a couple of the adjacent communities that are going to be approving cannabis dispensaries as well. And it's not like one is really special from the other. We're all selling the same products for the most part. So when you take a step back and look at the numbers that have been presented based on actual observation, I think they're going to be significantly lower than what you see by the time we open these doors.
So do you think, based on whatever studies you've done, do you think that a brand new business on that spot will have less customer traffic than a Dunkin' Donuts, where there's one every 2 miles?
Based on what I've seen, just observing the way sales have transpired in recreational use, the amount of licenses they're giving out, I think it's going to be significantly less than a Dunkin' Donuts. Now, I'm not an expert on Dunkin' Donuts. All I can do is when I drive by, see the lines of people in the morning. But I've seen a handful of recreational dispensaries in the state now, and I don't think we're comparing two very different businesses.
The cars are the same. The cars would be the same. It doesn't matter what the business is. The traffic is traffic, and cars are cars.
Understood, but you're also looking at a business where people go to Dunkin' Donuts once a day, maybe more than that. People go to their dispensary, sometimes once a month. So it's just that the frequency is significantly less.
Okay, so you're totally comfortable with the traffic situation the way it's been described.
Absolutely.
Okay, I have nothing further at this time.
Perfect. Mr. Barnett?
I have no issues. I agree with the applicant. I think a Dunkin' Donuts and a dispensary are two extremely different models of retail. And I think this was very well thought through. And I believe that our professionals and the applicant have done as much work as possible here. And I'm very, very comfortable with their testimony.
Perfect. Mrs. Kessel?
I have no issues other than I really hope that the name could just be Story Dispensary. But other than that, no issues with the application. I like it.
Perfect. Okay, Mr. Wishna? I forgot you, sorry.
No problem. And I'm just trying to understand that, and I can understand why the data and the anecdotal data is kind of tough to put together when we don't have an existing use to base it on. So I appreciate Mr. Epstein's comments to kind of get us to understand that the quantity of open doors by the time this one opens is much higher than the number that's open in the state as of the time that this anecdotal data was taken. I guess my concern would be when we're coming up with calculations on a worst case scenario as it relates to the highest peak times when the dispensary would be open. We're only making the assumption that there's the existing tenants that are in that building today. When you have a restaurant that has no more than 2 people that are coming into it, I can't make the assumption that restaurant's going to last very long. So if that restaurant were replaced by a Shake Shack or something where it's still the same use but has a much higher demand from a parking perspective, I think I'd want to understand anecdotal data from that perspective and kind of back into what would happen in that event, right?
Yeah,
so
I can answer that. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, so I'm not going to speak for Mr. Epstein right this second for this situation, but I'm going to say that if, let's say, the Japanese restaurant was closed and a prospective tenant of some sort was driving up and down Route 22 and they looked at this site and they thought, we're going to be the hottest thing since Chick-fil-A, I don't think they're going to take a site that doesn't provide enough parking for them. So I got to believe, and I'll let Mr. Epstein answer this, that when he looked at this site, he may have looked at it at a certain way when it came to the parking and the access and circulation. Because I got to believe that some of these users know what they're looking for when they're looking for a space to occupy. They're looking for a certain amount of traffic on the road, but they're also looking for a certain amount of parking on the facility. Visibility is another important.
You know what, Mr. Klein, I do retail site selection for a living. I've been doing it for 25 years. So I know what site attributes work for retailers and what don't. I think that the issue had to do with this particular location and the fact that we're taking anecdotal evidence based on businesses that really don't have very much business going into them. So
I thought you were asking what would happen if the Japanese restaurant went out and another more popular restaurant.
I know what will happen. It'll be a parking issue. If it got re-tenanted with the same use.
All right.
And let me jump in there. So realistically, the township code is what we control in that instance, right? And the township code, based on what both the code expects and the traffic analysis that's been presented to you, both show that this is conforming and appropriate. Now, if somebody else came in, they'd have to go through exactly that same analysis before this board to do exactly the same thing that we're looking to do. And
I understand that. I'm basing the fact that the testimony had to do with anecdotal evidence that's probably not all that accurate based on what we know.
So,
We're-
yeah, and
So I'll interrupt.
The use doesn't exist, so.
well, and that's the fundamental issue, right, Mr. Wishna? And I think that's actually Mr. Schwartz's issue too, right?
So what we'll do is the
Mr. Chairman, lost you.
for tenant missing, can you guys hear me?
There you are. Yep.
Okay.
That is a interesting freeze.
Now we
Yeah.
Sharon, the meeting's yours.
Oh, I like it like that.
There's lightning going, thunder and lightning. Kicked me off a little while ago too.
So what'll happen is the planning board will retain jurisdiction of this site, that in the event of any of the tenants leave, they will have to come before the planning board to review. Is what we will do. Similar to what we do with other shopping centers. I think that's the way we'll handle that. That will solve some of Mr. Schwartz's concerns, some, not all, and that will solve Mr. Wishna's concerns. But Mr. Wishna, it will be very hard pressed for this board if a restaurant goes out to not allow that to go through, but we'll have to kind of evaluate that based on what's. Anything further, Mr. Wishna?
No, but I think we lost the last couple sentences of
Sharon, I think the meeting is yours now. There goes Sharon.
Sharon, are you there? Okay, Sharon, if you don't have any questions, I don't have any other questions as well. I will take this opportunity to take this opportunity to open this meeting to the public. Any members of the public that wish to have this application, please bring them forward.
I am not seeing any members of the public with their hands raised at this time.
Going once, going twice, and I will close this meeting to the public and hand it back to the board for consideration. So I think, from when I reviewed this with Keenan and our board professional, they were comfortable, provided that they met the conditions in the letter and they've already agreed to and provided testimony on this. I think that the board would, if it's my understanding, that the board would request Storybook a dispensary if the state and Mr. Keynes reviews this with our other council and determines that that's correct. The board would lean towards that. That the one other condition that came up was that there's the owner of the site needs to maintain the garbage disposals. On the site, there is a lot of the dumpsters that are not enclosed. We need to make sure that.
Aaron, why don't you take over?
Nope, he's back. Almost.
Oh, we lost Sharon.
Yeah. Can everyone hear me again? So
yeah.
Let's just, if there's any other questions or concerns, just remand this for a vote. Mr. Barnett, anything that you would like to add?
No, I think this meets our ordinance as the ordinance is intended. I appreciate the thoroughness of the applicant.
Anyone want to make a motion?
Actually,
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion.
Whoa. We're closing discussion?
No. Well, okay, so
let's not have a motion until we've all had a chance to discuss, please.
Go ahead, Mr. Schwartz.
I think the applicant should be grateful that we sent Mr. Disco out, because I will say that but for Mr. Disco having done a more thorough job than the applicant's expert, I would be a no vote on this. And I personally have no problem whatsoever with adult use marijuana dispensaries. I think they're a welcome addition. But I'm finding that Mr. Klein did not do what I believe to be a professional job here. Going to this site one time for 1 hour, not knowing, he had to defer to how many transactions per hour his client undergoes. That's, I would think, a critical point for understanding the traffic, as opposed to relying on data from 2018 on a different use for this type of facility. I don't find that anything that was presented by the applicant in terms of traffic is reliable here, and I reject it outright. That said, I thank Mr. Disco for his comments and the work he did going multiple times to the site and to other sites, so we actually have something on which to base a determination about traffic.
Okay, Andrew, the whole point was that we were going to rely mostly on Mr. Disco anyway, but the applicant wanted to have some sort of backup from a traffic expert stance. So I understand your concerns.
Well, I mean, I'm just tired of traffic experts coming to us, waving a magic wand and telling us traffic is going to be okay. If they're not going to put in the time and do the work, then there's no point in presenting them to us. And this happens not just on this application, this seems to happen on every application. And it's frustrating that we have to send Mr. Disco out to actually get a reasonable opinion about traffic.
Well, we always send out Michael to do the backup as well, so that way we get a second level of opinion. And we can decide in the future maybe to hire a traffic expert. I felt Mr. Disco did a good job.
It shouldn't be our job to do so. It should be the applicant's.
Okay, I understand. Mayor, do you have any questions or concerns before we make a motion?
No questions or concerns, but just if you'll deal with me for just a minute.
Absolutely.
First of all, just want to thank our professionals. Mike, you've done an outstanding job. Jen Law, our planners, once again with another tough application that we ask you guys to consider. As everybody I think knows how passionate I am about this, and how I believe this is a step in the right direction. And tonight, hopefully, in what I'm expecting will be approved, we will be one step closer. And once again, we all have to remember, this is Route 22. This is where we wanted it. We had the option as a township to put it in maybe a quieter location in our downtown. But the infinite wisdom of the township committee was that we would wanted to see it on Route 22. And whether it's this location or another location, traffic on Route 22 is not going away. To Mr. Schwartz, it's not. It's not about to become a one-lane highway. So I think some of the comments made today by some of the board members, I could not follow it. But I do want to thank everybody here tonight for putting the hours and the time in. And I'm very happy that we are a step closer to realizing this. And this will bring in revenue for our community and is the right direction. So thank you all.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Huber, Committeeman Huber? Rich?
No.
Perfect. Mr. Loeffler?
No, nothing that hasn't already been said, no.
Mr. Wishna?
Yep, no further comments. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Bar-
So, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair Kessel just said her internet went out and she apologizes. She did not mean to leave the meeting. But with that, I'd like to make a motion for the approval for a preliminary and final site plan conditional use for a cannabis dispensary or Story Dispensaries, maybe of Springfield LLC, application 4-2022 S at 130 Route 22, block 3106, lot 1.
Yeah, so before it's seconded, I want to add a few things. One, that dumpsters will be maintained by the applicant or by the owner on the. Two, that there will be no whatsoever, order for pickup, curbside pickup, and if that the applicant would like to do it in the future, he must come back to the planning board. Three, traffic. They will comply with all the letters of Mr. Disco and Mr. Hughes, the two different letters that were issued and updated. I think that was the plantings. We didn't discuss the plantings,
but I know that there was a landscaping plan that was approved by Mr. Disco as well, that they will comply with that.
Also, you want to put in that the planning board retains, I'm sorry.
Yes, the planning board is going to retain jurisdiction of the other two applicants, the other two tenants in the future. There is a change of tenancy that will be coming to the planning board for review. And then the third, there was one more issue, the sign, the planning board's lien is that the sign will be Story Dispensary without Springfield LLC. However, if council in their review finds out that the planning board doesn't have the ability to do so, which I think we do based upon my discussion with them, we'll revert back to their sign package. So that would be the conditions. Anyone want to second that?
I will second. Is Ms. Kessel getting back on?
No, she had a.
Hold on, Sharon Kessel?
And she sat through the
Oh,
entire
Sharon.
meeting.
Can you hear her? I got you in the meeting, Sharon. Can you hear Sharon, Jeff?
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Kessel's back in the meeting.
Yes, I was just trying to dial in, but I couldn't remember all the passcode number things.
Perfect. Ms. Kessel, do you have any comments? I mean, Mr. Barnett made a motion to approve. I outlined the conditions. Do you have any questions or
I
concerns?
don't have any comments, and I vote to approve as well.
Okay, well, someone's got to second it, then we'll do a roll call.
I think the mayor just seconded it.
Perfect. Ms. Law, can we have a roll call?
Yep. Mr. Barnett,
Yes.
Mayor Kaiser,
Yes.
Committeeman Huber,
Yes.
Mr. Schwartz,
Despite the applicant's failure to present credible traffic information, I vote yes.
Mr. Lawfer,
Aaron, take off mute.
Yeah, I'll abstain.
okay. Mr. Wishna,
Yes to approve.
Vice Chair Kessel,
Yes.
and Chairman Tiger.
Yes, to approve. Now, I know that the applicant reached out to our council. If I wanted the board to authorize our council if the applicant needed anything from the state to the resolution will be memorialized on September 19th, which is our next meeting. The applicant needed anything from a counselor to factually say that the board took action and approved this application on today's date and time, and what the conditions were, that the board was comfortable with that being done by our council. I don't see any with any concerns on that.
Nope, that's fine.
Perfect.
Mr. Chairman, just to kind of nuance that statement, I think it's actually, there would be potentially two letters, one to the township committee. I believe that would be necessary to authorize them to take action that's required under the CRC licensing, and then subsequently, anything to the CRC, as well as potentially to the building department, so that they can start looking at the internal fit outs.
Our board attorney will cooperate with whatever letters that need to be to effectuate the application.
Thank you, sir.
Perfect. Okay, seeing none, I want to take this opportunity. Thank you for joining. Mr. Disco, real quick, if you can, I know that Springfield Nissan World knocked down their entire building. The board last time, we heard some testimony on that from you regarding that there was a deposit put in escrow for $25,000. Since then, they've taken action. If you can quickly update the board so they're aware of what took place.
Yeah, they had a contractor from Newton, I forget the name of it, come out in July, proceed to take the steel down and then dismantle the old foundation remnants and then backfill. And when I spoke to them at about 1:30 today, they anticipated that they would have the backfill of the foundation complete with what's called dense graded aggregate or recycled concrete aggregate. It's a stone product, so that it would be near flush to the surface. And the goal is to pave it tomorrow, and then they would be done with the site for purposes of complying with the desire to remove the old rolled of tile structure.
So no, until that's complete, you won't issue a letter to release the funds. It'll stay on.
Yeah, we would certainly be prudent and wait. I think there was a desire to have that completed by today, if I'm not mistaken. I have no problem with the fact that the paving's gonna happen tomorrow in lieu of today. The goal was to get it done, and I think the board's actions achieved that, and we still have the bond in place for anything that we would need it, and I would say at this time, we would wait until they request the bond before we take action to return it, so.
Perfect. Members of the board, Aaron,
You're breaking up again.
any questions?
Nope, you're breaking up.
Ms. Law, can you just pull the board if there's any questions?
Are there any questions?
I'm gonna ask, are we gonna open this up to the public for any general questions for this board? And if,
Yes.
and then maybe I'll have a question if we should adjourn.
Okay, if there's no questions, Mr. Disco, then let's take this opportunity to open the public, open this matter, open up anything before this board to the public.
Seeing no members of the public.
Seeing no members of the public, I'm going to close this, anything to the public, and open the, back to the board for, to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, see you
Aye.
September,
Thanks, everyone.
summer.
Good night.